Good afternoon. Today we are celebrating at Vytautas Magnus University the 9th National Conference of Lithuanian Sociological Association, the conference that is entitled Inequalities, Power and Social Justice in Contemporary Societies. It's a pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Margaret Abraham from Hofstra University in the United States. And currently she serves as president for International Sociological Association. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you, Milda. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, during your plenary speech about sociologist engagement in contemporary societies, you have been talking how sociology can contribute to this contemporary world. So, can you briefly tell us, what do you think, what is in general the role of sociology in this world where we see so many boundaries are blurring? So what is the role of this particular discipline in this contemporary world? Why is it still important to have this sociological knowledge and use it in contemporary societies?
Well, let me begin by saying it's a pleasure to be here, and that's a truly important question. As I mentioned today in my talk, I think sociology has a pivotal role to play today, particularly in contemporary society, at a time when we are dealing with very difficult issues and we're in what I call tumultuous times. Sociology today is a time in which we have to really talk about civil society and sociology's engagement with civil society and the issues that impact our world, both in terms of a long-term perspective, but also our everyday life. For me, I mean, one of the biggest things about contemporary sociology has always been involved or engaged in issues of social transformation and social change, but also addressing the issues of the time. And today in contemporary society, we have major issues of migration, of social justice, of increasing inequalities, and sociology, together with other disciplines, can play a huge role in talking about addressing these social problems, but also finding solutions for change, engaging with broader publics, and engaging with policymakers, and engaging with governments to bring about that social change.
What kind of particular social problems would you mention where sociological knowledge is particularly important?
Well, you know, there are a spectrum of issues that we can talk about, but clearly we can talk about social justice, inequality, but we can also talk about today, as I mentioned, migration, violence, being a huge issue about what kind of violence has always existed in society, but we have different forms it takes place, different manifestations, and its linkages between power, violence, and justice as a theme of, you know, the Congress that we will have in 2018. So I think when we talk about it, we're also going to have to look at issues of health, education, the ways education is changing, but also around elderly. And most importantly today, about new forms in which we think about democracy and social change.
Why do you think it is important for young people to study sociology?
I could go on about that for a long, long time, but let me put it briefly that sociology, actually to me, in many ways, is the soul of not just public sociology, but social justice. And social justice is the soul of sociology. I think today when we are confronted with a spectrum of problems, as well as issues, but also looking at pathways for social change, young scholars and sociology can provide that kind of critical thinking, the forms of analysis, of the ways of framing to bring about social change. It can link research with action. And I think the young people are really the people who be bringing about that transformative change. And so the grounding in sociology is such an important way to think about social change, but also about everyday life. And I think, I will say, I think sociology and students who study sociology are well equipped in making those intersections between critical thinking, about how to transform it into policy, how to think about problematizing, doing the kind of analysis and bringing about social change. And that's why I think young students should be taking sociology. Sociology can be something that is so innovative. It is socially innovative and can bring change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, at some point you also have touched upon this question, but once again you have been talking in your speech that there is a lot of economical knowledge that we have, for instance, about inequality, and still in contemporary public debates we miss sociological knowledge. Why do you think this happens? What is in sociology that it is sometimes not so much attractive for the public?
I can talk about this from the perspective of the different places I've been to and what people tell me as to why we are at the margins. And one of them that has come up commonly is this idea that our sociological engagement is written in ways that do not translate to publics. And therefore, it's as though we're talking amongst ourselves rather than talking to people beyond academia. And so, of course, we do phenomenal research, but that research doesn't really get translated to those publics and therefore is not a part of the broader discussion. The second one, which I'm still trying to work out, is the fact that often young students in different parts of the world say that sociology is common sense. And what makes common sense and sociology different? So clearly, we as sociologists have not done a good translation of what that means and how we do have the kinds of frameworks and the methodology that is used that is not the same as common sense. And that how we as sociologists use our sociological imagination to shift, as C. Wright Mill says, private problems to public issues. And I think a part of that is one of the reasons that we, unlike economics and other fields, that we have not been there so much in the public. I will also say that sociology has been very generous, and we have our roots in a kind of interdisciplinarity too. And in this neoliberal market, what we see is how we do get siloed, but much of the work that we use is also kind of taken by other disciplines and carved into, business sociology or organizational behavior. And in a way, our generosity, or perhaps not framing it well in the broader publics, has led to sociology being to some degree pushed to the back rather than be at the forefront.
In your presentation, you mentioned some troubles with critical theory within sociology, that we are all probably sometimes maybe too critique and do not come out with more positive issues.
Yeah. Well, let me reframe that to some degree. I do think critical sociology is really important. I think it's important for us to be able to address the issues by first looking at it, examining it, exploring what are the problematics of it. But what I have understood as I go again into other parts, but for my own work too, that there is a fatigue with sociologists often being told that we critique issues and we problematize, but we don't offer any pathways or solutions to move forward. And therefore, there's a fatigue with only looking at critical sociology. Or not only look at critical sociology, let me correct that, with only critiquing. I think it's very important to critique, but then we should also be able to translate that in ways that we can also offer some pathways for change or solutions. Otherwise, I mean, in the world we live in, it's not adequate to just analyze if we can't do some forms of intervention too. At least for me as a sociologist, I think that's very important. That sociology's role in contemporary society and the tumultuous times we live in is not just to analyze the world, but actually intervene for progressive change.
Well, that was actually my last question, what sociological perspective can bring by, as you said, intervening to this public or political discourse. So what particularly can, let's say, public agents or politicians can expect from sociologists?
Yeah.
And how can we find the common talk?
Yeah. I think there are two ways to think about it. The first is, obviously sociology has to engage with getting our positions put forth to publics and to politicians and for policy. But I think we have to also be careful how our data is used by politicians or in a way misappropriated or misrepresented. So I think I want to be very clear about that first part, that I think our material is important, that what sociology we do, but that we have to be careful, at least cognizant of how that can be used. We can't control it always, but being sure that we do. The second part of this is that I think sociologists, through whether it's social movements, through policy reports, or through our very practices, by linking research and activism or research and action, can actually bring about progressive change. And that means looking at issues of whether it's poverty or the kind of education. Today we live in a time when education has become commodified, has been marketized in ways that institutions really define everything by funding or enrollment. It's become a big businesses for universities. How do sociologists say that we're not just reactive, but actually lead the way in many ways to bring about that change, whether it's about thinking about social justice or about equality or violence? What is this relationship between power, violence, and justice? Or we talk about criminalization, that yes, we want for some issues around violence to be addressed as a criminal problem and an issue, but not solely criminalization that doesn't look at the way the criminalization is done in terms of socioeconomic classes or race and the biases within that. So for me, that second point of sociology, sociologists can bring about considerable social change if we bring about ways in which we connect ourselves to nonprofits, to community building, strengthening communities, make partnerships with communities, engage in the kind of work that is meaningful to the broader communities that we live in, where we connect to the local and the global, as I've spoken quite often, building on a contextual global sociology, that we share our lens and our research and the rigorous data that we provide and the ethnographies or the spectrum of methodologies that we have to actually provide the kind of information but also the kind of analysis that not only publics can use, non-profits can use, governments can use, but that we can also critique in ways through our critical sociology. And I think that's what I think sociology has to do, that it has to look at histories, it has to be able to critique, it has to help formulate policies and practices, and then take that step through collaboration, both with the other disciplines, but also with governmental agencies, etc., as well as non-profits or NGOs. In those collaborations, discipline and community, work in those partnerships on research projects that can actually pave a better future for all.
And if I may, we have not agreed about this question, but I was thinking while listening to you how to make this interview more up to date, let's say. I was thinking about this Me Too. I think maybe we can add this to like a flavor. Because I think this is particularly what you are talking about, this local and global, connection. And, during last few weeks in Lithuania, public is debating about 2 girls who have been revealed about sexual assault that they received from one wide-known director. And they were certainly contributing to the global movement Me Too. And of course, you are not aware of local context, but I think in our public debate we had quite a bit interpretation from local perspective. What would be your interpretation from more global perspective? Because you are coming from US where this movement started, and what would be your ideas about this, if you can add?
Yeah. Let me first say that I'm not really a Facebook person, but absolutely. I mean, I think the idea of violence is not something new, right? Sexual violence, but what has really been important is that you see the Weinstein case and many of these cases that are coming actually in England as well as in India, and now you had talked about Lithuania. The idea that there's been so much of this kind of abuse that happens, right? And there's been silence around it by those in power, and the assumption that there is no impunity for this kind of abuse that takes place. And I think the Me Too movement has actually shown how many people have experienced this in the private realm, and not been able to speak about it publicly because of the kind of dominant system that we have, where you have people in power able to get away with it. It has, as many of them have talked about, it has, for those who have experienced this, has impact upon their lives and on their careers. And I think it's actually truly another point in this kind of revolution of speaking out, and no longer tolerating these silences and holding people accountable. And so to me, there's been this bigger discussion about why didn't people come out earlier? No, because the systems didn't allow that. And I think we have to not only talk about the abusers, but we have to talk about all those institutions that have silently actually not only supported these abusers, but let them go on knowing it, the knowledge, right? That because it's either good for their business or good for the company. So we have to talk about that part of it. We also have to talk about all those other people in power, not just abuser, but who through their strategic silence or turning their head away have allowed this violence to take place. So to me, I think the Me Too is a huge moment in saying that this can no longer go on. This is a public moment. This is a move from private to public to say there have to be mechanisms by which we redress these injustices. So to me, I think it's a very important part of moving the broader discussion of violence and sexual assault to the public, to the public realm. And the ability, it takes a lot of courage to be able to speak out, but also doing this with a certain amount of accountability on all sides.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming, and once again for giving this interview.
Thank you. It's been truly a pleasure to be here at this 9th conference of the Lithuanian Sociological Society. I must say that it is only when we have these kind of engagements at the local and the transnational and the global levels. I know the important work that you have been doing and going, and putting these position papers and reports, and that's what we would like to see. The ISA hopes that we can build a global community of scholars like this and activists who can share their work, and together by looking at and reading each other's work and sharing it with broader publics, can we make a difference at the local, at the transnational, global level. So thank you, Milda, very much
Thank
for
you.
inviting me and giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Margaret. Bye.